I wanted to point out a couple of passages in our very short introduction to environmental economics where the author, Stephen Smith, slips into a sloppy mental habit that economists are prone to do. And I just want to rebut them because they really aren't what most economists would think, I argue, and I've experienced. Anyway, let me just point out a couple things. I've got a page here that's part of page 11 if you have the physical paper copy. I've got this circled sentence. The economist's normal presumption that a market economy leads to socially desirable outcomes is also overturned by the presence of externalities, the category of market failure most directly relevant to environmental policy. Well, there should be no normal presumption that the market leads to socially desirable outcomes. The perfectly competitive model that certainly Adam Smith spent a portion of Wealth of Nations describing and is emphasized heavily in introductory textbooks, that is just an extreme special case. And just reflect for a minute on what you know from your principles course. What are the assumptions necessary to consider a market as being perfectly competitive? Well, homogeneous products jumps out. That's obviously many buyers, many sellers. Okay, there are a lot of markets that satisfy that. A lot of markets that don't, though. But just some of the other assumptions are so extreme that we should think of competitive markets as the exception, not the rule. So just to focus on the most preposterous one, that we have to assume to get perfect competition, homogeneous products. Every product is the same. You look around, do you see any market where that's true? Well, maybe agricultural markets a little bit. Talk to a farmer though, and they'll talk to you all about the very great differences between even different varieties of grain, different moisture contents of grain that's harvested, etc. But financial assets, okay, there are a few things we can think of, but most things we can think of. Look around you. What are the products in your view? Guaranteed, most of them are in market segments that feature differentiated products. So, some of those some consumer goods are highly competitive, but they're not perfectly competitive. And, there's interesting things to talk about, but it's not like, oh, the world is this wonderful, perfectly competitive place that everything works normally, except for in the few cases where we have these failures. No, quite the opposite. That there are a lot of market failures. Sometimes you can write the rules of the game, establish property rights, etc., to minimize their effect and enable the market to do a pretty good job. But let's face it, these issues are everywhere, and somebody has to do something about it, and sometimes it takes some direct government action. So these kinds of statements are really, I believe they're pernicious, and they work against the common good. They account for the common view that economists just don't get it, which I would agree that making a statement like this means you're not getting it. All right, another one is sort of similar. I've got this one. This is page 12. In both cases, positive and negative externalities are a source of, quote, market failure, in the sense that the natural operation of an unregulated market economy will not tend toward the efficient level of the externality. Well, this is a bullshit sentence in some of the same way that the previous one I talked about is, but even more so. The natural operation of an unregulated market economy. So there's this misinformation being put out there that if we just let nature work, we'll get competitive markets all across the land. But competitive markets are the result of thousands and thousands of years of innovation and evolution of social institutions that aren't natural in any sense of the word. They're wonderful when they work, but let's not pretend that there's this organic market all around us if we just get government out of the picture and let humans do what they're naturally willing to do. Humans, to do what they're naturally willing to do is to beat up people that are smaller than them and take their stuff. That's your primal gut urge, and we have generated a bunch of social institutions that enable us to cooperate and attain these great level of riches. But let's not pretend that there's this organic tendency toward some perfectly competitive market that, again, government should just get out of the way. It's preposterous, and no economist that thought carefully about it. I think Smith is just being sloppy here. Anyway, just take these kinds of statements and chuck them. Don't even take them with a grain of salt. They're just preposterous. Oh, interestingly enough, though, I guess I gotta go on and point out another one. I just didn't mean to include it in this circle, but let's look at that last sentence. This is sort of funny because it's going to contradict. Well, it's going to go against what I just said. Without regulation, a market economy will have too few beekeepers and it will have too much pollution. I argue that the Coase theorem is largely irrelevant because negotiation costs are too high for most of the environmental problems we talk about. But interestingly enough, the issue of beekeepers, that is, there's people own bees in bee boxes. Farmers are well aware of the benefits, and there's an active market where farmers pay beekeepers to locate their bee boxes on the farmer's property. So this is one where private market property rights exist, and negotiation costs are low. And this example in a book on environmental economics is sort of silly. It's a city person's view that I used to work on a farm, and we used to have farmers' bee boxes on our property, and back in the early 80s that we were just allowing this beekeeper to have his bee boxes on our land. But now, as understanding of the role of bees in pollination has advanced, there's an active market where farmers pay beekeepers a lot of money to put their boxes on their farm. All right. So enough. That's my sort of head exploding as I read things that are preposterous. And fortunately, most of the text is great and insightful, but these 3 sentences now that I've talked about are exceptions to that tendency.